Have you ever started a new job and felt completely lost? You're trying to figure out who's really in charge and how things actually get done. Well, we're going to turn those confusing org charts into a practical map for your career so you can navigate any company out there with total confidence.
Does this sound familiar? You land the job, you're excited, and then on day one, it feels like you're reporting to literally everyone. And you're just sitting there thinking, wait, who is my actual boss? Trust me, this feeling is super common, and it's a direct symptom of a company's structure.
So, how do you solve this puzzle? The key is understanding what's called organizational structure. The best way to think about it is like an invisible map of your company. It shows how information flows, who makes the decisions, and how work gets from A to B. And let me tell you, if you can read this map, you can navigate your career so much better. Now, every company's map is a little bit different, sure, but most of them are actually built from just one of four fundamental blueprints. So let's dive in and break them down. Once you see them, you'll start recognizing the terrain wherever you go. First up, we've got the one you've probably seen a million times, the functional structure. This is your classic pyramid-shaped org chart. You know, all the marketers are in the marketing department, all the engineers are in engineering, and so on. The whole thing is built to create deep, specialized expertise. But here's the thing. This model comes with a major trade-off. On the one hand, it's super efficient. It lets people really hone their skills and become true experts. But the downside, and it's a big one, is what's called a silo mentality. The departments can become so isolated they stop talking to each other, and the whole company gets really slow to adapt. All right, next we have the divisional structure. Think of this one like a collection of mini companies all living under one big roof. Each division is focused on a specific thing, maybe a product line, a geographical region, or even a type of customer. A great example is Toyota, with its separate divisions for North America, Europe, and Asia. So what's the big win here? Speed, absolutely. Each division can move fast and stay totally focused on its customers. But the flip side? It can get pretty expensive. You might end up with 3 different marketing teams for 3 different products, and that means you're duplicating a ton of work and resources. And now we get to the one that causes all the confusion we talked about at the start, the matrix structure. Yep, this is the system where you officially have 2 bosses. An engineer, for example, reports to the head of engineering for their technical skills, but they also report to a product manager for their daily project work. You see this a lot in fast-moving tech companies. Now, in theory, the matrix is designed for maximum flexibility. It forces people from different departments to collaborate, which can spark a ton of innovation. But let's be real, having 2 bosses is a recipe for power struggles. It can lead to something called matrix fatigue, where you're just constantly exhausted from juggling competing priorities. Finally, there's the hybrid structure, and this one is exactly what it sounds like. It's not a single blueprint, but a custom mix and match of the others. A company might have its main departments set up functionally, but then create small, agile divisions to go after new products. The goal is to try and get the best of all worlds. And while a hybrid structure can be tailored perfectly to a company's goals, it comes with a huge risk. If the roles and the rules of engagement aren't crystal clear, the whole thing can just become a chaotic, confusing mess for everyone involved. Clarity is everything here. Okay, so we've covered the what, the 4 main blueprints. But now for the really interesting part, the why. Why on earth would a company pick one of these maps over another? Well, that's where we get into the really high-stakes game of corporate strategy and survival. See, every single leader is wrestling with this one central paradox. To be efficient, you need stable, predictable processes. But to survive in a marketplace that's always changing, you need to be agile and able to adapt. If your structure is too rigid, it can become what the sociologist Max Weber famously called an iron cage, trapping the company in its own success. So this brings us to the first big idea for how to deal with this problem. Way back in the 1960s, a historian named Alfred Chandler came up with this simple but powerful idea. Structure follows strategy. It means you first have to decide where you're going. That's your strategy. Then you build the organization, the structure, that's going to get you there. But of course, it's never that simple, right? Another big idea came along called contingency theory. And this one basically says, hold on a second. There is no one best way to organize. The right structure is contingent. It all depends on the environment. If you're in a stable industry, a rigid structure is fine. But if you're an AI startup in a chaotic market, you'd better be flexible. Okay, theory is great, but let's see how this stuff plays out in the real world. Nothing shows you how high the stakes are better than a tale of two giants, two massive companies that took completely opposite approaches to drawing their maps. In one corner, you've got the Canadian auto parts giant Magna International, a company that is all in on radical decentralization. And in the other corner, you have the American conglomerate, General Electric, which for decades was the poster child for a complex, centralized system.
So Magna's whole strategy was about being fast, entrepreneurial, and responsive. And true to Chandler's theory, their structure followed that strategy perfectly. They built the company as a collection of hundreds of small, autonomous divisions where every plant manager basically runs their own business. The result? They're incredibly lean and agile. GE, on the other hand, went the opposite direction. They built this gigantic, incredibly complex matrix to try and leverage their massive global scale. But the world changed. The digital economy arrived, and it demanded speed. GE's structure became that iron cage we talked about. It was just too slow, too complex, and it eventually imprisoned their strategy, forcing them to break the entire company up.
So, what does this all mean for you? Well, everything. Because once you understand these blueprints, you can be way more intentional about your career. You can actually choose a company and a role where you're not just going to survive, but where you're truly set up to thrive. It's all about finding your perfect fit.
So take a look at this. You gotta ask yourself, what kind of environment do you do your best work in? Are you a specialist who loves clarity and wants to go deep in your field? A functional structure is probably your jam. Do you want to take ownership and move fast? Then look for a company with a divisional structure. And hey, if you're a natural collaborator who actually enjoys complexity, you might be one of the rare people who's perfect for a matrix. Once you know the map, you can choose your own path.
Okay, before we wrap this up, let's just look over the horizon for a second. Because every single structure we've talked about is based on human hierarchies. But what happens when technology starts to fundamentally redraw that map for us?
Here's a pretty provocative thought for you. The traditional job of a middle manager has always been to gather, process, and pass information up and down the chain. Well, generative AI can now do that instantly and probably better. This could make that entire layer of the classic corporate structure completely obsolete.
Which leads us to one last really big question for you to think about as you navigate your career. In a world of flatter organizations and AI-driven coordination, will your next boss even be a person at all? Or will it be an algorithm?